Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm very glad that you're here. My name is Rosemary Malfi. I am the Pollinator Network Coordinator at NOFA Mass, and you are attending NOFA Organic Land Care Program with Jeremy Pelletier and Sephra Alexandra. And I will introduce them in just a moment, but before we jump in, I have a few details to review with you. Oh, there we go. The first is that NOFA Mass is strengthening our commitment to racial equity and justice by examining whiteness and dismantling systems of white supremacy that are part of many dominant systems, including our agriculture and food systems. We also want to honor the indigenous land stewards who are the original occupants of the land on which we are currently living, farming, and residing. Please use the link that you see on the screen, which will also drop into the chat, and find your area and identify the original stewards of those lands. We also want to call everyone to action on a few items to assist BIPOC-led organizations. Those actions are listed on this slide, so I'll just kind of pause for a minute so you can read those. And I also want to let you know that there are 2 events taking place for Spanish speakers and for BIPOC members during the conference, and the details are listed on the slide, and you can also find that information in the program book. I think we're all familiar with Zoom norms by now, but we're going to go over a few things anyway. The first is that this account is set to mute participants upon entry, so you should be muted now. During the Q&A, you can unmute yourself, raise your hand, and unmute yourself to ask a question. And to do that, you simply press the microphone icon at the bottom of your screen in the icon bar. When you're done, please mute yourself again so that we avoid creating background noise while others are speaking. We are going to save, so there are going to be 2 presentations during this workshop period. After each presentation, we will have a Q&A for that speaker. But at any time during the presentation, you should feel free to drop your questions into the chat, because I'll be keeping an eye on it, and I can then ask the questions later after the presentation is done. And of course, I want to let you know that this session is being recorded. We have a number of sponsors who help make our conference possible, and I encourage you to purchase from them. And when you do, to let them know that you appreciate their support of NOFA Mass. Here are some of our generous sponsors and some additional ones. We have some really incredible items to bid on in our online auction, so you can visit the link that you see on the screen. We'll also drop that into the chat. Or you can text NOFA to 855-202-2100 to see the lineup of items that are available. And finally, we want to take a moment, please take a moment to explore the virtual vendor marketplace, where there is a lot of great information and some generous discount codes for conference attendees. Most importantly, we want to thank you for sharing your weekend with us, and especially our NOFA members who make our education and advocacy work possible. At this point, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to introduce our presenters, and Jeremy, I think you're first, so you can start sharing your screen. So we have 2 presenters today. Jeremy Pelletier is originally from the Big Island of Hawai'i and moved to Connecticut in 2012 to pursue a graduate degree in global sustainability from Central Connecticut State University. He is a graduate of the University of Hawaii's Geography and Environment Department and Central Connecticut State University's Geography Department, where his graduate research was in human mobility and climate change. He is currently the Director of Operations and the Organic Land Care Program at CT NOFA. Sephra Alexandra, the Seed Huntress, leads the Ecotype project for CT NOFA, fortifying a truly local native seed supply chain eco-regionally in the Northeast with organic farmers. To spread the word and seeds about ecological restoration through rewilding our living seed banks and the soil, she promotes backyard expeditions through botanical.org. That's B-O-A-T anical.org, and we'll put that in the chat, putting right plants in the right place. Thank you both for being here, and I turn it over to you, Jeremy.
Thank you, Rosemary. Hi, everyone. I recognize some names here, a couple of AOLCPs. Welcome. Thank you for the introduction. I don't remember when I wrote that. It must have been a while ago, my introduction. So as Rosemary said, this is going to be sort of a 2-parter today. I'm going to go over the Organic Land Care Program, which is a program here based out of Connecticut, but is nationwide. If you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to put it in the chat. And before we even start here, I'm going to put my email in the chat as well. So if you have any follow-up questions, you can email me. I can't figure out how to. Well, anyway, Rosemary, maybe you can put my email in the chat. Thanks.
I'll put it in the chat.
Thanks. I have the full screen now, so I can't see anything. So like I said, this is a two-part presentation. I'm going to be going over the Organic Land Care Program, which we'll talk about what it is, why we have it, why it exists, why it's important. Sephra will then give a presentation on the Ecotype project, which is related to the Organic Land Care Program, but different. So you're getting a 2-for-1 deal today. And you'll notice the differences between our presentations. I'm a very minimalist minded, black and white sort of presentation, but I digress. So we'll just jump right in here. The Organic Land Care Program is a way to define what organic means in landscaping. There are no regulations in the landscape when it comes to the word organic. Unlike agriculture, where the word organic is heavily regulated by the USDA, no such thing exists in landscaping and the care for our land. And so the Organic Land Care Program, that's what we strive to do, is define what organic means in landscaping and how you can use organic landscaping methods based on a set of standards. And we'll go over the standards a little bit. Okay, so I'm assuming everyone here knows what NOFA is, so we can probably skip this slide a little bit, but just a refresher, there are 7 state chapters, started in 1971. The Connecticut chapter started in 1982. And the Organic Land Care Program was initially a co-venture between Massachusetts and Connecticut, and now resides solely in Connecticut for administrative purposes. So again, as I mentioned earlier, why is an organic farming association talking about lawns and landscapes? Well, back in the 90s, when the Organic Land Care Program was first started, as I mentioned earlier, we really wanted a way to define what organic meant in landscaping, because landscaping has a huge impact on in the ecosystem. Agriculture is not the only land use, not the only type of land use that has negative impacts on the environment. I read a slide that said, I read an article somewhere that said, something like 2% of the land in the United States is lawn. And that's a huge, huge number. And without any regulations over what organic means, when taking care of the land, that's some pretty powerful impacts that we're having. Pesticide use affecting human and environmental health, and as I said earlier, guidelines and definitions for what organic land care practices mean, like the USDA has for the National Organic Program. So a brief overview. It is a nationwide program. We're based here in Connecticut through CT NOFA, but we have organic professionals, or AOLCPs is what we call them, accredited organic land care professionals, in all corners of the United States. We have a bunch in Hawaii, California, across the West Coast, a ton in the New England area, a couple in the British Virgin Islands, a couple in the US Virgin Islands. So we're really everywhere in the United States, a ton in the Midwest. And this actually, I didn't realize I didn't update this, but we have about 800 accredited organic land care professionals, again, AOLCPs, in much more than 20 states. I thought I updated that. And like I said earlier, we define what organic means in landscaping through the Standards for Organic Land Care. And then we educate and advocate for organic practices in land care. So basically non-agricultural land use. Our mission is to extend the vision and principles of organic agriculture to the care of the landscapes that surround us in our daily lives, whether it's your backyard, the golf course, a public space, a park. your clients. Again, all non-agricultural landscapes. We really want to define what that means. Now, some key differences between the OLC standards, Organic Land Care Standards, and the NOP standards, National Organic Program standards for USDA. We define what organic land care means, and it's a voluntary accreditation program, educational program. So professionals can become accredited through us, and they abide by the standards when offering organic land care services. So it's a voluntary agreement. We don't have any sort of legally binding options or legally binding contracts. We can take away your accreditation if we find that you are not abiding by the standards for organic land care when offering organic services, but there's no legally enforceable requirements. Whereas in agriculture, there's some pretty steep consequences if you are growing food and calling it organic without actually being certified organic. So those are the main differences between agricultural and landscape. So a quick definition of what organic land care means. It's essentially, maybe you already knew this, no synthetic pesticide, fertilizers, or soil amendments. Those are prohibited. You promote biodiversity. You're trying to improve soil health using management practices that restore and heal, and then working towards a closed loop system. And a perfect closed loop system is no outside inputs into the landscape. Everything is within that certain landscape you're maintaining. And the full definition here, I'll give you a second to read it. But the gist is it's based on minimal use of offsite inputs and on management practices that restore, maintain, and enhance ecological harmony and beauty in urban and suburban landscapes and gardens. Rosemary, do you have any questions so far?
Not in the chat yet. Yep.
Okay, perfect. And something we try to teach in every course that we do is the precautionary principle. So it's this: when an activity raises threats of harm to the environment or human health, precautionary measures should be taken, even if some cause and effect relationships are not fully established scientifically. So, a couple examples of that is, how much evidence do we need that a pesticide is harmful before we start taking measures to reduce that harm? If we haven't, perfectly established that sort of cause and effect relationship, but we know, there's tangential evidence, there's some evidence that it's harmful. Like, do we wait until we fully establish scientifically that this is harmful, or do we go ahead and take a little precaution and not use whatever we're using? So that's something that we teach pretty heavily. Another example might be fracking. How much evidence do we need that fracking is bad for the environment, scientifically proven, before we take a step back and look at it from a precautionary standpoint? So all of this is to say, this boils down to, the bedrock of this program is the standards for organic land care. This is what defines what organic means in landscaping. And before I go on, I am happy to send a copy of this to everyone who's in here. So if I could get that information at some point. We also have it virtually, so I can send out the link to the PDF for that as well. So Rosemary, I'll connect with you later today at some point and get all that information out.
Sounds good. So
this is, again, this is what defines the standards for organic land care, or this is what defines organic in the context of landscaping. Now, I meant to ask this earlier, but how many people here, I don't know if anybody knows how to use their sort of hand feature, how many people here are landscapers or work in landscaping or land care or garden design or things like that. Okay, I see Carol. I see a few people raising their hands. And I recognize some names here as well that I know you're in landscaping. So this, and how many of you are AOLCPs already? I recognize a couple of AOLCPs in here. And again, AOLCP stands for Accredited Organic Land Care Professional. We love our acronyms. So perfect. I see a lot of people raising their hands here. So hopefully a lot of you are familiar with this. The standards for organic land care are broken out into allowed, I should say preferred, allowed, and prohibited practices. Preferred practices and materials are in accordance with organic land care. Allowed are materials that are acceptable as needed, but should, where possible, be reduced in favor of preferred. Organic pesticides are allowed, but not preferred because they're still pesticides. They're still pretty intense. Prohibited, you can't use them, and be in accordance with the standards for organic land care. Again, the preferred are practices that we strive for, and again, others are allowed and maybe required, but they're certainly not preferred. They're best practices. Some examples of allowed practices are least toxic pesticides from natural substances, non-water soluble, slow release fertilizers. And again, these are, not preferred practices because there's still, a ton of nitrogen in fertilizers. There's still toxicity in pesticides, whether they're natural or not. And so we want to move away from using them as much as possible. And prohibited practices, so the big examples here are synthetic pesticides, synthetic fertilizers, GMOs, and invasive plants. Those are the big ones that are prohibited when you're offering organic services or when you have an organic landscape. Now, because, again, organic is not regulated in the landscape, and there are situations where there is not an organic alternative for something, you can use, for those who are accredited, you can use what's called an emergency non-organic rescue treatment. And so this is a treatment or series of treatments that will, that you might have to use if there's no organic alternative. So as it says here in the slide, when a client and professional have agreed on organic care, but an emergency arises and there's no effective organic treatment, that's when you can sort of have this clause. You say, it should be rare and used only in extreme circumstances. And that's when you talk to your client or whatever, manager of the property you're working on and say, this is the situation going on. Let's figure out a quick and effective treatment that's non-organic that we can use to fix this. And there's not really a regulation to this in the standards, but examples might be a plant, property, or area of high cultural, economic, or social value. So that piece of property or plant dying wouldn't be acceptable. We've had AOLCPs in the past who are confused by this, and it is a little confusing because in the end, what defines high value? It could be a plant that someone just really, really likes, and it's not acceptable for that plant to die. Does it have a high social, economic, or cultural value? I don't know. That's really up to the person who owns that piece of property or plant or group of plants. So you really have to use your own judgment on this. We have AOLCPs, landscapers, who, unless they know it's something really expensive or it's culturally significant, they won't, they'll just let the plant die, or they'll ask the client to find someone else to treat that. But again, it's really your call on you and your client's call on what to do with this. But we try to lay out, that it should be, something of high value. And again, that's subjective. So at this point, we talk about when you're an organic landscaper, you have to abide by the standards for organic land care. You have to follow the set of rules laid out by NOFA. What about if you want to become an AOLCP, an accredited organic land care professional, but most of your clients are conventional clients? In the standards, we have what's called a definition of split business, meaning you don't need to get rid of all of your conventional clients. You don't need to transition to an all organic business. You can certainly have two sides of your business. The restriction to that is you got to distinguish between your organic and non-organic services. And so if you have the NOFA logo pasted everywhere, you can't wear that or have that visible when you're treating conventional clients or when you're servicing conventional clients. And application equipment has to be different between the two. So I would say, I'd say that there are 95% of the landscapers who are accredited through us have split businesses. Many of them have mostly conventional clients. We have very few 100% organic businesses where their whole, all their clients are on an organic program. So it's certainly, this is a point of confusion. I think with some people, they think if they get the accreditation, they're not allowed to ever use a pesticide ever again. And that's certainly not the case. What we want is to sort of swing the pendulum in the direction of organic, and hopefully someday the majority of the land will be cared for organically. So again, we offer credentials in organic land care. And what does that really mean? And why is it important? So why not an accreditation versus a certification? And some of that has to do with just semantics. But for certifying property, for example, we realized there was just no way we had the resources to certify properties across the United States. How would we certify? Who would do it? What would we inspect? Do we inspect your business? Do we inspect your properties? Do we do soil tests? And we just didn't have the resources for that. So again, back in the 90s when this started, we decided that it would be best to have an accreditation based on the individual. So we're not accrediting a business, we're accrediting an individual in organic land care. And so it's based on voluntary adherence to the standards for organic land care, not on monitoring. And we always say we educate, we do not regulate. And again, there has been times in our history where we've had complaints from, there are certain businesses who are saying they're offering organic, but then not. And again, it's difficult because organic is not regulated. It's not a regulated word in landscaping. And so I could go out today, and print a magnet, put it on my truck and say, Jeremy's Organic Land Care. And that wouldn't be a problem at all. No one could stop me. And I could go and spray anything I wanted to and put down inorganic fertilizer. And there's nothing to stop me. So that's where we felt like we needed to come in and create this program so that when people are seeing, Joe's Organic Lawn Care or Jeremy's Organic Landscaping, there's nothing tied to that. So now with this credential, if you see someone offering organic services and they have the NOFA logo, there's a little bit of, you can check on that. You can say, hey, this person is sort of spraying this chemical that's not organic. We can go and check, and then we can, touch up with them and say, ask them why they're spraying that. Okay, it's a conventional client. Okay, you got to take your logo off. So there's a little bit of, what's the word? There's some accountability there. And also it helps clients distinguish between real and real organic and people who are just saying they're organic. It's like the word natural. Natural doesn't mean anything. It's a marketing ploy. And so organic, before we created this program, was really a marketing ploy for landscapers, because it didn't mean anything. Hence why we created the standards for organic land care. And again, it says here, if a client brings a concern to us about non-organic practices, we can investigate the claim and revoke their AOLCP status. And it's only happened a couple of times. For those of you who are interested in becoming accredited, the way to do that is to complete the accreditation course. It's a training. It's a training where we talk about we go through the standards, what's allowed, what's prohibited. So once you complete that course and pass the exam with a 70% or higher, and you sign the voluntary agreement to provide services in accordance with organic land care standards. And again, it's providing your organic services in adherence to the standards, not necessarily all of the services you offer. And then there's an annual renewal fee of $110 and 4 CEUs. The way the CEUs work is a little bit different from other organizations. We do an audit each April of random land care professionals. And if you're on that audit list, we then work with you to identify what sort of education you took over the year that would be pertinent to your work. We have all kinds of accredited professionals. We have arborists, landscapers, lawn care people. We have landscape architects. We have regular architects who got this credential so they can work with the landscape architects better. We have designers and consultants and educators. We have all sorts of people with this credential. So we recognize that we want people to sort of identify their education, what best suits their professional education. So that's why we sort of leave it up to you to decide what you want to do with your professional development hours. So again, if you're part of that audit each April, then we work with you on identifying what you took that would count for credits. And in doing that, we hope, this is only the second or third year we're doing this, we hope that encourages you to seek out professional education throughout the year and not have to worry about, oh, I got to get 4 hours for NOFA. You just take what interests you, what's pertinent to you and your career, and then we can kind of work backwards from there. And then this is just a little slide. We started a website last year or this year. It's hard to tell what year it is nowadays. Last year, where we map out all the AOLCPs. So this is a little bit older screenshot. We have more, like we have to add California and Hawaii and the Virgin Islands. But this is a site where you can have a profile on. So if you offer professional services, then you can, someone in Ohio can click on Ohio, and then click on their county, click on their city, and see who's around them offering organic services. And same for each of the states that are in bright green. And because we have individual credentials, we don't accredit the whole business. You just need really one person per business to be on here. So this isn't a total, this isn't a a comprehensive guide to everyone who's accredited, because there are some professors who are accredited and they don't want to be on here because they don't want, you know, people asking them if they want to mow a lawn. We do have a comprehensive list that we keep for people who want to know, want to double check that someone is accredited, but this is more for for your marketing. Are we on time? Oh, perfect timing. So that is sort of my spiel on the organic land care program. I'm happy to answer any questions, or if you want to unmute yourself and have, you know, chat a little bit. We have some time left for my side of the presentation. So.
Thank you, Jeremy. If anyone has questions, you can either put them in the chat or, you know, feel free to come on camera and unmute yourself. You can raise your hand. I have a question. So
yeah.
I know you said you're working toward, in organic land care, you're working toward a closed system.
Mm-hmm.
How long does that take? And I'm sure it's context dependent, but like, how long does it take to get there?
That's a good question that I don't have an answer to. You know, I think it depends. There are some landscapes that have been using inputs for so many years. I mean, you have to wait. You have to. It's like that transitioning from inorganic to organic. It takes 3 years in agriculture, right? You have to wait 3 years in order to be certified organic. I guess it's sort of the same with landscapes. You gotta, you know, you can't turn it on and off overnight. So that poor answer is to say that I don't know. If you're reliant on inputs from outside inputs, I think taking it one step at a time, like rather, you know, switch to leaf mulching rather than bringing in mulch. Leaves that fall on your property and using that as mulch. Getting a soil test, always get a soil test. Get a soil test to see if you even need the inputs you're putting in there, and if you don't. I say things like that. So I don't know, but it's the answer.
So if someone's doing, so let's say someone does a soil test and they figure out that their soil, you know, isn't great and does need input. I mean, should they do a soil test like every month, every year? Or?
No, I think, you know, before you do anything to your property, before you put any input, certainly you should do a soil test, maybe once a year. I think one of the educators said they do like once every couple of years. If you're doing an intense treatment, maybe more often. But I think, you know, figuring out where your soil is at and what's needed is the first step. So getting the initial soil test, and then probably every season until you're satisfied is what I would say.
Okay.
I think it also varies on landscape and landscaper.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Sarah.
Hey, Sarah.
You know, I'm not an organic farmer, so I don't know what the latest organic standards are for growing crops.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like the standard of having no off-farm inputs is actually more stringent for landscaping than it is for food crops, because organic farmers are allowed to bring in organic or off-farm inputs, aren't they?
Yes, and I should clarify that it's not part of the standards to have no offsite inputs.
Oh, okay.
The goal is to minimize, you know, to work toward a closed loop system. Is there a perfect closed loop system in a manicured?
Yeah.
Probably not, you know.
Okay.
Even someone with the most, right, even someone with the most perfect homestead you could think of probably brings in inputs. It's not a perfect closed loop system. So I think the idea is working toward a more closed loop system.
Okay.
There are certainly no restrictions on bringing inputs in.
And I'm not sure if it's the same Sarah, but
It
hey,
is.
Sarah, it is, okay. Sarah also put a question in the chat about could you give some examples of preferred, allowed, and prohibited fertilizers, the categories that you listed?
So prohibited would be any synthetic fertilizer. So any synthetic fertilizer would be prohibited. Allowed would be like it says in there, I think it's slow release. Let me go back and figure out what it says here. Like I said, yeah, non-water soluble, slow release fertilizers. Preferred would be inorganic, non-water soluble fertilizer. So it needs
Great.
nitrogen to fix, to have access to that. You need nitrogen fixers. That would be preferred. Allowed would be this, and a prohibited would be any sort of synthetic fertilizer.
So like bone meal, would that be
That's
allowable? I mean, I guess.
I believe bone meal is allowed.
Okay.
I believe it's allowed. There are, in this, if for those who have read the standards to go through, there's a lot of really specific things that like some things you think might be allowed and they're prohibited, some things you might think were prohibited or allowed, and there's a reason for it. For bone meal, I believe it's allowed.
Okay, so read the book and it'll go into more detail there.
Yeah, I don't have everything memorized, and we update it every few years. I'll give a quick example. This next version that's coming out in 2022, this year, I think, we're allowing PVC for certain stormwater management systems. Before, PVC was not allowed for anything. But it's nearly impossible to have an affordable, effective stormwater management system without PVC, which is why we're allowing it under certain contexts. So it just depends what the context is and how it's used, and so it's updated every few years.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Margie Lee asked, is there a significant increase in organic landscaping practices? And then commented that there seems to be a lot more interest in native plants.
Yes, there is a huge increase in organic landscaping practices and interest. For whatever reason, maybe it's because NOFA's here. I know NOFA has such a presence in the Northeast, but the Northeast is really the mecca of organic landscaping. Chip Osborne, who many of you may know, he's from Massachusetts, lives in Maine now. He is the go-to organic landscaper in California. There's just no one out there doing what we're doing up here. And so people out in the Midwest and the West Coast are bringing people in from the Northeast to try to emulate what we're doing up here. It just doesn't, they're 20 years behind when it comes to landscaping. So yes, there's a huge booming interest in organic landscaping. What was the second part of that question? Native plants?
There was a comment about that there seems to be a much greater interest in native plants.
Yes, absolutely. And native plants is an integral part of organic landscaping, and Sephra will be talking about that next, which is, I'm excited to see her talk. Yeah.
I'm just pausing to see if anyone wants to unmute and ask a question. So another question I have is, so I know that it's impossible to have, sort of full accountability for what folks are doing. And, we're sort of relying on there being a demand for organic land care and an interest in it. Are there policy changes at the local, state level that could help this along so that more people are aware of it or have to implement it? Do you think that'd be effective?
Yes. So there's a number. It's mostly at the town and municipal level, but a really strong example of that is in Maine, in Portland, Maine. They have, I think they passed it a couple of years ago, but they have the strictest land care laws in the country. So synthetic pesticides and fertilizers are no longer allowed on public or private property. And it's enforceable via fine. I think they tend to do more education. Like if there's a complaint or a violation, they tend to be more lenient with education. Like, hey, what are you using? Do you need help figuring out what you need to do? But they do a fine on public and private property. in Portland, Maine. South Portland also has ordinances, and there are ordinances popping up all over the country now. In Connecticut, there are plenty. And so the problem now is education, and educating folks on how to transition from a conventional property to an organic property. What does that mean? How much does it cost? Is it too expensive? And if you go to Beyond Pesticides is an organization based out of DC. They have a map of all the different ordinances across the country. I'm not sure where on the website it is. I saw it a couple times. But I would say, yeah, there's a ton of ordinances popping up everywhere. Statewide, I feel like it's harder to pass something statewide. But certainly municipal. There's a lot of, in Connecticut, there's a lot of voluntary ordinances, which I don't know if they work or not. But certainly.
Voluntary, mainly like a non-binding sort of.
Non-binding, yeah. But certainly there are examples across the spectrum. Portland, Maine has the strictest. They have a board that oversees sort of this law, and it's made up of people who are accredited professionals. It's written into the law that they have to be NOFA accredited to sit on that board. So it's certainly it's getting bigger and bigger for sure.
Excellent. Looks like maybe it's more of a comment or an inquiry, Luis. Give me space. Luis, did you want to ask your question or?
Well, yeah, I wrote it on the chat part, and I'm just looking for a partner or a farm, whichever is available to produce our own compost. We are a social equity cannabis farm to be open in Malden, Massachusetts, and we're looking to mix our own formulas or give the formulas to an individual and be able to mix those and then bring that compost to our containers and our indoor facilities. So sorry if I'm a little out of the topic. I think it's about health and soil too, but I'm just I'm an experienced farmer in Vermont, and I do not have contacts in Massachusetts, so I'm reaching out to people who could help me with this necessity. We do have a budget to either rent or purchase the compost, so it would be a win-win situation for both.
Luis, you give Luis my email because there's a few people down here in Connecticut who do exactly what you're saying, who do work around the Northeast, and so I'm happy to put you in touch with them.
Thank you. I already have your email, Jeremy. I thought that was a good contact. So it's jeremy@ctnofa.org.
Yeah, so email me when you get a chance, and then I'm happy to connect you with a few people working in Connecticut and Massachusetts.
Thank you. I will email you right after your workshop.
Okay, perfect.
That was delicious, honey.
Thank you. All right, if have any additional questions, feel free to ask them right now. If not, we're approximately at the end of the Q&A time that we plan to allot, and we could turn it over to Sephra.
Perfect. And again, if everyone wants to email me as well, just give me a few days and nudge me if I don't respond in a few days. I'm sort of behind in emails, but you have my email. Go ahead and email me if you have any further questions. Otherwise, Sephra has a really great presentation coming up.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeremy. All right, Sephra, we turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Jeremy, there we go.
Sorry.
Screen sharing.
Jeremy, that was great. So exciting. And in terms of organic land care, one of the best things we can do in designing and implementing these organic land care strategies is utilizing native plants. So that's what I'll talk about. But First, Dr. Malfi, thank you so much for having us in NOFA Mass and all the great work you're doing as the Pollinator Network Coordinator. Obviously, our interests are very much aligned. I emailed you a lot of those links that I'll be referencing because for some reason it won't let me put it in the chat. But as I get started here, also a hello to Jono, who's on this call, who was one of my earliest mentors in regenerative design and loving agro-food forestry. So just love the NOFA networks and all the wonderful people they bring together.
Hey, Sephra.
Hi, would love to see you sometime soon. All right, so here we go. Hopefully you can all see my screen. I'm kind of gonna paint the context of what's going on with our landscapes right now and then talk specifically about a project I lead for Connecticut NOFA. And if there's time at the end, we can even go over how you winter sow, because now is actually the best time to be sowing those native seeds for your landscape. I call myself the seed huntress on a hunt to preserve the biodiversity of our earth through seed conservation. I've worked internationally for the global seed banks, during natural disasters, fortifying community seed banks on island nations, nationally collecting rare and wild seed for the Seeds of Success program for the botanical gardens at Kew, and now locally fortifying our living seed banks for CT NOFA for the Ecotype project. So as we begin, I just think it's important. I sit in the unceded lands of the Pagasic Golden Hill tribes, a land known as Matchamucks, the beautiful land of such great diversity and abundance that it's really with every beat of my heart trying to preserve and share that diversity for all future generations. And I just have such reverence for seed. These beautiful images come from a book called Seed Time Capsules of Life. And when we look at them, we realize that these are living embryos. An acorn grows an oak. And I had a great mentor who took his iPhone in one hand and a seed in the other. And he says, which has more intelligence? And it's like the seed, ever adapting since time immemorial, carried by birds and wind and humans, wherever we go and travel. They're just so remarkable and beautiful. So this is really my passion and what leads all the work I've done for the past decade or so now. So just quickly let's give a little bit of frame of reference. When we're talking about our global seed banking system, I kind of just want to paint how seed conservation is done around the world very quickly. There was Nikolai Vavilov, a Russian ethnobotanist, who went around the world and he discovered where crops first emerged, or maybe not discovered, but documented. So you think maize and wheat in Mexico, pulses and grains in India, potatoes in Peru, and he mapped out our crops and their crop wild relatives, right? The wild relatives that we select and steward over time to make our agricultural crops that transitioned us from a hunter-gatherer to agrarian society. He said where crops first emerge on our planet is where they have greatest amounts of diversity. And that is really where our global seed banks are positioned on our earth, to house that diversity in terms of man-made and natural disasters. So we have a backup of what is called germplasm or seeds. Up in the right-hand corner, you can see a drawing of Svalbard, the global seed vault. I don't know how many of you have heard of it. Also sometimes known as the Doomsday Vault, but that's where there is a backup of our world's field crop seeds. And that is called ex situ conservation, when seeds are safeguarded away from the place where they're grown, again, for cases of natural and man-made disasters, so that genetics stewarded since time immemorial is not lost. What we're talking about with the Ecotype project is fortifying our living seed banks. That's in situ, in place. And ultimately, within these two seed conservation strategies, this is the preferred one because it's like having dusty books in a library or having these ever adapting to the changing climates, presence of pests, what the pollinators prefer. Just like we as organic gardeners safeguard our heirlooms, our entomological partners in pollination are doing the same thing. This is what they've adapted with since forever, and it's what they like. So we want to help preserve these genetic strains in the soils where they belong. So let's just take a second and my slides advance. All right, so we are here in the Northeast, right? For all of you in the Northeast, we know we have a pretty fragmented landscape. Fragmented meaning this study, this white paper, Forest Fragmentation in Massachusetts, kind of lays out that there are not too many urban forest lists or wild stands, or we drive through and we're seeing predominantly all of these houses everywhere with all of these lawns. And so certainly the work of the pollinator pathway has started to facilitate the conversation that like our animals and our wildlife, they need a corridor to be able to feed on and migrate and have habitat. And, you know, we have a lot of work to do to recreate and safeguard that. The Nature Conservancy in Massachusetts has had a great initiative where they have different facets of making sure that we have wildlife friendly land management, making sure that there's, you know, safer road crossings for our animals, and that we have food for our migrating birds. So that's kind of what we're walking into. Fragmented landscape. Well, what do we need to do to a fragmented landscape? We need to being rewilding. Who here has heard this term that's starting to come into vogue in terms of how we deal with our landscape? When human, yeah, thanks, Rosemary. When humans have impact on land, right, we've de-wilded it and now we need to rewild it. So here is just an illustration of what a broadleaf forest ecosystem looks like when it goes back into succession, right? You have the young forbs. They're showing, you know, the different bird habitats that facilitates to when we have shrubs and trees that start to grow up, and then you have a more mature forest, and that can facilitate larger keystone species. And so the concept really is how can we put these truly local native plants back into our landscapes, right? Truly organic or regenerative, from the edible forest gardening type mentality, when we create what's known as perennial polycultures, putting a whole bunch of different species with different trophic layers, right, Jono? I know Jono knows what I'm talking about. You want to create these self-maintaining, self-perpetuating, self-facilitating systems that mimic natural ecosystems. Think permacultural design, right? So that's where we want to take our cues. But how do we get these native plants back on the landscape, and where are we getting these native plants? Just quickly to give you a little bit of background from what's going on around the country. The Bureau of Land Management in 2014, there was a big meeting, and they're saying, you want to know what? A lot of our wildlands out west are burning. Like we don't have the supply of truly local native seed from those areas to rewild these landscapes after they've been burnt out. Like we really need to figure out a seed strategy nationally to make sure that we have some sort of a system of folks that are collecting and growing and storing these truly native seeds to make sure we have them when we need them. So in 2015, this seed strategy was published, and their goals are putting, it's same as ours at the Ecotype Project, the right seed in the right place at the right time, and ensuring that there is the availability of these genetically appropriate seeds to restore viable and productive plant communities and sustainable ecosystems. I'll help define it later, but ecotype, what we're talking about, is merely a reference to when you look out on your landscape and when a botanist can tell you, okay, this is an undisturbed area since glaciation, the term native, of course. Any of these terms could be up for debate and an hour-long conversation on their own. But for our purposes, we're saying when a botanist can verify and wild collect those truly local native seeds, they can be provenanced from that place. That is what an ecotype is. So that's what's most genetically appropriate for doing restoration in those areas. So after 5 years, just to show how the native seed strategy has been working, there's, you know, now people in every state focusing on this, trying to figure out their native seed supply chain, trying to make sure that they have all the different facilities that they need for these different industries that require native seed. So this is what's known as an eco-regional map. I don't know how many of you have seen this before, but the first time I saw these maps, I started to cry because it makes so much sense. If we put our bug eyes on. Do we see where Connecticut ends or Massachusetts begins? No, we see the riparian corridors and the broadleaf forests. We see in terms of ecologies and ecosystems. So what happened was, in terms of restoration and conservation, all these different scientists were working, you know, the hydrologists, the water scientists, the forestry folks, ornithologists, the bird people. They were all working off of slightly different data sets. And they said, if we really want to do conservation and restoration, we need to work off of a shared framework. Thus created these eco-regional maps. So this is level 1, and you can see where we are. We're in the eastern temperate forest. We'll zoom in a bit more for our ecotype project purposes, but I just want to give you a frame of reference that this scope exists. That's what Doug Tallamy, the author of Nature's Best Hope and so forth, he uses the level 1 ecoregions for the native plant guilds or species that he recommends. So here we are now in the east, and the Mid-Atlantic Regional Seed Bank, which is our closest seed bank for ex situ conservation of these ecotypes, led by Ed Toth. They did a great study, and what they did is they were trying to figure out where people in the east were sourcing their native plants and how far they really had to go to find resources for that. So if you think about, and so you can see, again, for all these different, like what we're talking about here, organic landscaping, people who work restoring wildlife habitat, people who want to help support pollinator support, all of these different industries want native plants. 74% of them said they want ecotypes. They can only find it locally 15% of the time. So as organic farming organizations, just like with our local food movement, we had to look at our food sheds and really bring in how close we were sourcing our organic food from. Now we're doing the same thing with our native seeds. We need to know our nursery men and women. We need to know where our seeds are coming from, and start promoting this concept of ecotypes. Usually in the native seed industry, and this is not to vilify anyone who's put in a pollinator garden and bought plants from the Midwest, but we're just trying to elevate the conversation so we can help share best practices. What most often we're getting our plants from the Midwest, which has slightly different bloom time, slightly different soil. And so like a monarch that has a 5-year migration, if we have bloom times that are blooming a little bit too long, they're missing their food sources all the way down the coast, like the domino effect. So that's why we really want to make sure we have the right plants in the right place. And if we're talking nativars, which is a cultivar, right? A cultivar is selected. I like how tall you are. I like the color of your flower. Well, with nativars, they're selected for those same traits. But what happens is they're not grown out from seed, they're grown out from cuttings, which means they have identical genetics, basically a monoculture. And like we heard with the Irish potato famine, or my research in the South Pacific on the taro leaf blight, when you have just one set of genetics, you are very susceptible to blights, pests, any sort of thing that can attack it. So we really want to help maintain the diversity. So what this map here is showing is the red dots are areas where they were not able to find ecotypes locally. So there really is a huge demand for it and almost no supply. So now we zoom in on these eco-regional maps. This is the level 3 on the right and level 4 on the left. And for our purposes at the Ecotype Project, we're working at level 3. So we, and some of you are in Ecoregion 59. Yeah, go Ecoregion 59. And what we're saying is, from a botany perspective, if we collect seeds, we collect those wild seeds within that area, we can proliferate it throughout that region and know that we're putting the right plants in the right place. As these supply chains get more developed, we can zoom in and have, 59F be the coastal species. But for right now, with such a broken supply chain, this is the framework that we're working off of. And again, so from being an organic farming association and talking about this in terms of landscape health, this initiative initially started out as a pollinator health initiative. We want to help support and make sure pollinators are on our farm. But what it quickly turned into was, this is a seed amplification initiative. We need to increase seed literacy and get more people growing native seed in the East, because it's not happening and there's no local supply. I've given this talk for 2.5 years, and it's only until recently where I'm actually able to point people towards a place where they can actually purchase this type of seed. So organic farmers actually end up being the perfect allies in seed production because they know how to grow crops, and seed is a fruit, it's a crop. You can grow it like you would tomatoes or cucumbers. So if you look, why is a farming organization interested in this? Well, on your left is the not well pollinated blueberry, and on your right is well pollinated. So as our executive director, Dina Brewster, says, she goes, these pollinators are paying our paychecks, folks. So if they're not on the landscape and we don't provide them the food and habitat they need, then we don't have the food and habitat and local food security that we need. So how do we fortify a supply chain to make these native plants available to the landscapers and everyone who wants to implement them on their organic landscapes? Well, it starts with botanists who work off of a very strict set of protocols adapted from the Seeds of Success program. We are not trying to promote that everyone on this call goes out and starts collecting the last wild seeds from our very fragmented landscape. We want to make sure that these botanists know exactly what species they're collecting, exactly how many seeds you can collect, so you're not denuding these wild populations, making sure that they're tracking the provenance of where they collect these and so forth. So there's a whole template and standard operating procedure that goes along with the wild seed collection to make sure it's done respectfully, and so that that wild landscape can regenerate itself. Then we work with organic farmers who take 200 plugs of each of those species and plant it just like you would any other row crop, at which point you let it go to seed. We, as the seed collectors, go in and collect the seed. And then we clean it, get it to the nursery men and women, so then they can make it available to you all. And this is, kind of disrupting a billion-dollar nursery trade, because oftentimes this provenance has not been tracked. So what we want to do is help make these species locally available within, as Ken Green called it, a seed shed, right? So we know about our watersheds, but now let's talk about our seed sheds, making sure we know where seeds are collected, grown, shared within an eco-regional area. So again, here is that one of those collection forms, and just a little bit of a, cheeky joke around, we care so much about where art is provenanced from, right? Who painted it, then who it went to, and so forth. Let's start tracking that for seed, so we know that we're using the most genetically appropriate material for restoration and conservation. So here is a list of the species that we have so far in our third year. We have 17 species and founder plots in production. Hopefully by next year, we'll have 25. Predominantly, we're working with forbs. We're starting to work with grasses. It's of course a dream to have shrubs and ecotypic trees come into this. And a lot of that is really limited by how much funding we can get, because there certainly is cost inherent in getting seeds from the wild into production. But it's really quite encouraging. The ROI of seed is amazing. From 200 plugs of our Joe Pye weed or our New York ironweed, we're collecting millions of seeds now. So very encouraging, and it's just extraordinary to be in these founder plots. It's this symphony of ecology. You're out there and there's insects you didn't even know existed, of colors and shapes and varieties. And Dr. Malfi, I'm sure you actually know what you're looking at, because I know much more about the plants than the pollinators, but it's just extraordinary to see. And from a farmer perspective, the more diversity you have on farm, the more beneficial insects, the more they'll be able to predate those insects that are, harming your crops. So it really brings in that great homeostasis that we find in the wildlands. And the picture in the middle, the great head farmers at the Hickory's founder plots, where we have the most, there's actually 17 species there, Jean Linville and Abby, they said, we don't see pollinators on our Rudbeckia, on our black-eyed Susan. And so one night they went out with their headlamps on, the red lights on, and they said, night pollinators, holy moly. So not even are we looking and making sure that we have plants that are blooming throughout all the seasons, but we're also thinking about throughout the day as the flowers open and their apertures open and close. So it's so exciting. And the Wild Seed Project, for any of you who don't know about it, Heather McCargo up in Maine, she puts out the most beautiful publications that take all of these complicated concepts and with beautiful art and very easy to understand diagrams, makes it very digestible. And she has this rewilding pledge, which helps you understand how you can help rewild some of your landscapes. That's one of the links that I put in and sent to you, Rosemary, but I very much recommend looking up her work. And again, you know, just to reference the importance when we're talking about organic landscaping, making sure that you have bloom times throughout the season. I saw this wonderful woman from the South give a presentation, and she said, y'all, it's like inviting house guests over for a week and only feeding them on Monday. She's like, you need to make sure there's food throughout the seasons, right? And then we leave those stems high so it can be their overwintering condos, like everyone going to Florida. All right, so how are we getting more organic farmers to grow out these seeds? Well, these are kind of new crops for folks to work with. And so what we've created with the help of Jean Linville, an amazing artist, we have these getting started toolkits. So at the bottom of the Ecotype Project website, again, that link's in our resources, these are all free downloadable as PDFs. And as we bring more species into the pipeline, we'll have more of these. So what these show you is, okay, here's New York ironweed, Vernonia. How far am I planting these apart? What kind of soil do they like? Who are the beneficial insects I can hope to see on them? And so it really helps to get you started with aggregating a lot of this information that was in a lot of disparate places into one easy to understand location. And here is the beautiful ironweed, and it is just extraordinary. And you can see it going to seed, right? So just like a fruit, any other fruit has a perfect ripeness, so does the seed. So you can see it starting to go to seed, and then down in the bottom corner, when it looks like that pom-pom, that is when the seed is ripe. Now, nature has so many amazing different dispersal mechanisms. The auguries, and predominantly native plants rely on anemochory, which is dispersal of seed by wind. So when we see the dandelions blowing around everywhere, they have that pappus on them, that fluffy part. And so basically when the Vernonia, when you're able to kind of blow on the seed head and they would fly off, that's how you know when you have perfectly ripe seed. And so, let's see. Okay, and then here's our Joe Pye weed, right? So that third picture is really peak ripeness of seed. The one on the bottom, it's a little too moldy. That's gone by. Let's leave that for the birds and everyone else who wants to eat it. So you really need to know that you're collecting at the right time. Here's the beautiful Penstemon digitalis. Has quite an interesting smell to it, kind of like a type of urine, really, when it's gone to a seed pod. But watching it, you know, ripen in those little pods that you have to figure out how to crack open, have a ton of seed in it, and it's just a really beautiful plant. So I'm just trying to show you the different morphology of what seeds look like. So there was a card, well, it's got to be somewhere. Don't know, but we'll find it. But and we have a card then that tells you what the seeds look like, how we need to stratify them, but hopefully that comes up. But that's just the reverse side of these. If you see that box there, we have for our farmers that come into the project, these 8x5 index cards that we print out that has all this information. So then you can see after we've harvested the seed, they get grown into plugs, and that's what's given to our farmers to start these founder plots. Now, we're working with farmers all throughout Connecticut. The urban environment happens to be one of the best for seed production because it has isolation distances from other populations of these same species. We want to make sure that, you know, it's far enough away. We wouldn't put a goldenrod founder plot next to a wild stand of goldenrod on someone's farm. You want to make sure that you're isolating those wild genetics. And so certainly this is Urbanscapes in New Hallville, and Doreen Abubakar does a great job mentoring youth in how to start a native plant nursery. You can see Jordy Elkins and Jesse Hubbard in the back of that picture, who from Highstead have has been the lead botanist in getting these seeds into production. And you have Hungry Reaper Farm and Waldingfield Farm as well. So what happens next? Because I want to make sure I leave some time for questions. So we're starting a community of practice. So we want all the farmers to be able to share what they found, how their seeds did, any growing practices that worked or didn't. just so we can really facilitate having a body of knowledge around this to help get more seed growers in the Northeast growing these crops. So just quickly, so you know the process of it, you can see that that's what the ironweed looks like when the stand has gone to seed. There's our Ecotype project logo, and that's to help promote a socially conscious brand, showing best practices all the way through this seed production chain. And sorry, my slides seem to be advancing strangely. Okay, so what you can see where the hand is on the left, the seeds on the right side of that are fully mature and ready to be collected. On the left-hand side, well, that flower still needs a little bit more time to let the rest of those seeds go to seed. So I and Jean and all the other great volunteers, you bend the head down, you kind of shake it into a brown paper bag to shake off the seed that's truly ripe and ready to go, right? And we leave, again, as I said before, we want to leave those stalks as high as we can for the overwintering of the pollinators. But then we have to go back through this stand a few times, because then the seed that's not quite ready in a few days or a few weeks, depending on its level of maturation, we'll go back and recollect that. So if you want the highest germination and viability of your seed, you have to make sure you're harvesting at peak ripeness. And then we get to clean it. So there's car mats from auto stores, you know, that you can get, and you're rubbing that pappus off. For home scale propagation, leave the pappus on, whatever, just make sure you're drying out and desiccating that seed so it doesn't have that water content in it. But you can leave the pappus on. For our purposes and having the seed be commercially available, we need to get it really clean. And those sieves are sieves that are used like in the soil sciences, and you can buy different sieves at dollar stores. And just as long as you're finding the right combination for the size seed you're cleaning for it, it's kind of a MacGyver expedition, but you'll figure it out. And it's really fun, especially kids like to help with seeds. For the Ecotype project, through our grant, we were able to buy the Winnow Wizard, and the Winnow Wizard was designed by Marcus Luttrell, sorry. He is a farmer at Frank Morton's Wild Garden Seed out in Oregon. Frank Morton is basically used to be on Grateful Dead tour and became one of the greatest lettuce breeders we have. So if you like lettuces, look at his seed catalog. There's tie-dyed lettuces and like 360 varieties. And the gentleman working on his farm was sick of cleaning his seed with these clippers or different small scale machines. So even though this looks like a very DIY operation, you can see the hopper on top where you drop your seed in. You can modulate the wind flow where it comes out, the seeds drop down. We blow off the chaff, and then the heavier, more viable seed will drop into the buckets, and the lighter, less viable seed blows off. Now, this at CT NOFA is open to all of our members because we really want to encourage eco-regional and bioregional seed. And so this is a really great machine to have available to our network. Bill Braun up in Massachusetts, he's a Winnow Wizarder as well. So at Ivory Silo Farm. For seed storage, the baseline is just keep it cool, dark, and dry. You just don't want it somewhere where your seeds are in a different humidity or getting hot or getting cold. You just want them to stay at a stable condition. So quickly. So here again, after we have our seed, well, how do you get these seeds to grow? So the other side of that card, as I was mentioning, has what the seeds actually look like. Because oftentimes you're looking and you're like, is there chaff? Is there seed? What's the seed? I don't know. How big is it? So we have that information. And then native seeds have to go through something called stratification. So if you think about out on the landscape, what's happening? These seeds are blowing off and they're falling into the soil where they go through a freeze and a thaw and a snow and an ice. And that's actually what they're adapted to have to go through to be able to germinate. So there's two ways to mimic that. You can either do cold stratification. And now is the right time to be doing this, my friends. You can either take like a coffee filter and you'll put your native seed in it and you want it to be moist, not sopping wet, and you roll it up. What the image there is how you would do a germination test on your agricultural crops just to see how viable your seed lot is. But what you'll do is you'll take your seeds, put it in a coffee filter, roll it up, put a date on it, and put it in your fridge for 30 or 60 or 90 days, whatever that species calls for. and then plant them out. Or if you're doing more broad seeding, you can mix it with moist sand, and same thing, put it in your fridge and make sure that you label it. Now, the preferred method, the preferred method, and this is from Eco 59, which I'll show in a second, which is where after all the hard work of our farmers in the Ecotype project, now have a marketplace to be able to sell their seed. It's a farmer-led seed collective. Dina Brewster, with her hat on as running the Hickory's organic farm in Ridgefield, brought all these farmers together, and now they have Eco 59, which is the first place where this seed, this organic ecotypic native pollinator seed, is locally available. Yay. And basically what you do for winter sowing is you take the native seeds, you put it into potting soil in trays, you cover it lightly with sand, because a lot of these seeds actually need a little bit of light to germinate. You place them outside, east facing or north facing, so that they're not in direct sun, but they're able to be exposed to the elements. And you cover them with some hardware cloth so that mice, I have much better pictures for this, for mice and rodents to not eat it. And then you wait for them to germinate. Okay, I know we have 15 minutes left. So here is Eco 59. So again, I don't know why my slides are being so strange, but there's a beautiful picture of all of our seeds that we actually harvested. But eco59.com is the first place where this provenance seed is available. So I encourage you all to go there and get some seed and winter sow it now. I'm just trying to see where, okay, here, this is what we skipped over. I knew we'd skipped over. Okay. So after all that hard work of that whole supply, here is our first batch of seed. And even those look like little jars, that represents, I don't know, thousands of hours of work. So it's amazing to see those seeds are here and the system works. And as we bring more farmers on, we'll just have more and more seed to be able to share. So as I said before, that led to Eco 59, the first farmer-led seed collective. And it's really exciting having a great community. And we hope some of you up in Massachusetts, as this model is replicated throughout the ecoregions, join in. And okay, so here's a much prettier version of how you do winter sowing, again, from the Wild Seed Project. And there's a link I put in the resources that walk you through all those steps of winter sowing. It's pretty easy. Nature wants to live. Just go for it and try it out. This is from Prairie Moon, talks about different germination requirements by species. I'm going quickly here to leave time for questions. Let's see. Again, the most important part is start asking your local nurseries if they have ecotypic plant material. The more there's a demand, the more we can have supply. With the predominant nursery we work with here in Connecticut is Daryl Newman at Planter's Choice. He's a wholesale nursery. So if you have a retail nursery, have them reach out to Daryl and make these plugs available. If you're within Ecoregion 59, let me know if there's a nursery who wants to jump on board, and I can explain to them the different ways that they can get involved. So in an effort to make, I'm so sorry for the back and forth of my slideshow. Don't know why that's happening, but in an effort to make this just fun and approachable, as was mentioned before, I started botanical.org. So the botanical expeditions say we're not botanists, we're botanists. I love paddling. I love going on expedition. I'm a member of the Explorers Club, the hallowed halls where Shackleton carried flags from, and Wings World Quest, the leading organization supporting women in science. But as we said before, the whole point of this initiative is to get these seeds back in the living seed bank, back in the soil. So once we do that, we paddle with these native plants. We work with farmers who are right along that riparian corridor, and we're able to put them back in the living seed bank. And then, as said before, the auguries. So anemochary, dispersal of seed by wind; hydrochary, dispersal of seed by water; myrmochary, dispersal of seed by, as E.O. Wilson's favorite love, the ants; ornithochary by birds; and anthropochary by humans. You know, we can be the greatest caretakers and stewards of nature. You know, if we can work with nature rather than against it, we can help proliferate. Just like, you know, 6 miles in from the coast of Long Island Sound were these huge masting nut trees and the most beautiful forests you could ever seen that were burned twice a season to make it so there was no underbrush and there was perfect habitat for the deer and all these partridges, and just prolific, abundant, well-stewarded land by the Aboriginal folks who were caretaking this land. And anything that we can do to help improve the health of our ecosystems is so imperative. So all of you out there, you know, who want to get into organic landscaping, let's make them as regenerative and healthy as possible for not just us, but for all the furry creatures and that have used, for example, these riparian corridors, these vital corridors since time immemorial. And so it's a real honor to paddle on waters that have been paddled by so many before and hopefully so many after. And again, as caretakers, we don't always want to take, we want to give back. So it's really been wonderful to lead these botanical expeditions, and we want to promote backyard expeditions. You don't have to go to the Himalayas to go on expedition. Gather your friends, get some native, truly local native plants, and have some fun. And it's beautiful. This was the first botanical expedition when we went from New Hampshire to the Massachusetts border. This past year, we paddled all of Connecticut on Polynesian outriggers. And next year, we're going to do some work around Zizania palustris, the wild rice up in Maine. So join us and follow along. A lot of great resources exist for how you can implement native plants on your landscape. You have Edwina von Gall's 2/3 for the Birds. The Native Plant Trust has so many excellent courses, and that's right in Massachusetts, where you all are just brilliant, brilliant people there. Doug Tallamy, great author. He has a number of amazing books around all of these subjects. If you want to read further, has a lot of resources for Homegrown National Park. Heather McCargo's The Rewild Wild Seed Project, again, is mentioned. She has a lot of great resources, and a link to her detailed instructions on how to do winter sowing will be in the resources. And of course, the Pollinator Pathway, which I know has really helped kind of open up this conversation and make the Ecotype Project possible, because so many people were able to hear this conversation and want to help support the pollinators. And now again, you know, the Ecotype Project stands to help make this truly local ecotypic material available. We, you know, if and when that's not available, the most locally adapted seed you can find is great. Again, if you've already planted pollinator habitats with genetics from outside your ecoregion, that's okay. Our pollinators need all the help we can get, but hopefully we can just be a resource and a replicable model to make, to help preserve the wild genetics of place and make those seeds available. And they are now with Eco 59. So I will stop sharing because the rest of these resources, I don't think we don't have time for winter sowing. But with the 8 minutes we do have left, I'm happy to help answer. And I know I have to go fast through a lot of complicated material. So thanks for letting me share all of that.
Thank you so much, Deborah. It's such a it's a great presentation, and it's just a really cool project. It's amazing. There are several questions in the chat, and we do have several minutes to address them. I think we can get to them all. Someone asked if they can get a paper copy of the ecoregion map with 9 to 10 regions, maybe for framing.
If you, oh, I know, I framed it too. It's amazing. If you go to the EPA, just type in Google EPA ecoregions, and what that will do, again, Rosemary, I don't know if you can just copy and paste that email I sent you and put it in the chat.
I actually, the email that you sent, I made a PDF and sent it to our conference coordinator, and it is now in the workshop materials folder.
Okay, I don't know if it's easy to put in just the chat too, if people have it now, but within that is a link to, the EPA's website. And all you do is go to level 1 was the one that I showed you that had those big swaths. Level 3 is where Ecoregion 59 is. And you can certainly print out PDFs from there. So that's a really great resource. And there's so much information embedded into that. James Obernick, who was the lead on creating that, has a lot of really great white papers too. If you go to Google Scholar, type in James Obernick and type in ecoregions, you can read about how and why those were created. He used to work for the military and was the soil analyst to know where soil was strong enough for plains to land and and people to march and so forth. And so he had a really great intuitive understanding of the landscape and helped translate that into this really helpful resource.
I just dropped a link to the folder that has the PDF. So if you open that up, the link should be live. Should be able to open the PDF and then click the links. And
Awesome. And I'll put in my email right now. So CT NOFA. So anything that we don't get to, you can just let me know. So there's that.
There is a question about Cape Cod, which is I think Ecoregion 84. Is there anyone collecting ecoregion seeds out there? And relatedly, same person, it was asking if you have time, could you suggest some native seed resources for Cape Codders? Because it is a different.
Shano, does anyone on this call know anyone? I mean, other than, the Native Plant Trust does a lot of seed collection, and I don't know but that seed is available for like research and so forth. So publicly available. We're still working on figuring out who that is, quite honestly, but I don't know does anyone on this call know of resources for ecotypic seed in Massachusetts? That's why we're doing the work we're doing.
Yeah.
That's why.
I would say very unofficially that there are some very smaller scale independent nurseries that I think are doing some amount of like local seed collection for to generate their inventory. I don't know that they're going through the entire process that was laid out for the ecotype project, but so I guess sort of unofficially some folks are doing some amount of that. Not on Cape Cod that I know of, but on the South Shore.
Yeah, and honestly, like I'm just right now, just start Googling ecotypic seed ecoregion 84 and see if anything comes up. Certainly what we've done with our past seed conferences is bring together the roundtables of folks that are doing this work in the different states. But I think the best place to start out with that would be emailing the Native Plant Trust and see if they have any suggestions, since they are based in Massachusetts.
Yeah. Couple other questions. One is there a role for backyard gardeners or for local action in our town?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Our greatest proponents, I mean, the predominantly the people that have been giving these presentations to have been the garden clubs and the land trust and the pollinator pathways, because ultimately our initiative of the Ecotype Project is predominantly building seed literacy for our farmers to make sure that we amplify the amount of seed we have available. But really, that is only as important as the folks who are actually buying and putting that seed onto their landscape. So the whole point is making that available for all the end users. And predominantly within the Northeast, that is, the homeowners, the land trust. Schools have been great. This is a great thing for the horticulture departments to do at schools. They're able to learn how to stratify and propagate native plants and do their own plant sales, which is a great process. And we make seed available for that. Or just by available, I mean, you can just purchase it through Eco 59. It's really not that expensive when you think about how much work goes into creating that seed. And, hopefully our initiative will have enough seed to be able to facilitate the needs of departments of transportation and municipalities at some point. But for right now, it's all about making sure the homeowners do have it. And as I said, with the ROI of seed, once you have these plants on your landscape, then you can go with your friends and your neighbors and collect seed off of your own stands and share that and stratify that. And so the whole point is to proliferate these throughout the landscape. So as I said, the birds, once they're in the landscape, friends, like nature helps you do the dispersal. So all of nature's friends will do it, but then you can really start teaching your friends and neighbors about seed collection and stratification, and then they can grow their own as well. And you can have fortifying your ecological corridors in your own neighborhoods, which is really what we all need to be doing in the Northeast to help safeguard our pollinators and all of our other furry and winged friends here.
I think directly related to that last point, Don was asking if you are actively working with community pollinator friendly projects or pollinator corridor projects to use regional wild seeds. And I take that maybe to mean two things. One is, are you working with folks to maybe help collect those seeds, and or are you encouraging them to use ecotype appropriate seed?
Yeah, we certainly encourage and educate any of those projects to utilize it. And now with Eco 59 having that seed be available to any of those projects, predominantly our focus is on working with botanists to get more species in the pipeline and working with farmers to make sure we're amplifying the amount of seed available. So we're always happy to help, educate and hopefully get people excited about utilizing this genetically appropriate, locally adapted material on their projects. But from that standpoint, that's more pointing them to the fact that we actually have this resource that, from a wholesale perspective, Planter's Choice has those plugs available. From Eco 59, we have those seeds available. But really what we're really spending most of our actual in the field efforts on is getting more organic farmers growing out these plants and then working on cleaning them and the whole process of that supply chain.
Awesome. Thank you for the answer. And I see Bonnie had a comment here. And it looks like maybe it's a sort of a bigger question. So what I'm going to do is I'm putting my email address, rosemary@nofamass.org, in here. And if you could just email that to me, I can direct that question to the appropriate place. I do have one more question, but we're at the end of the session, so I will. We're going to let folks go if they need to, and I'm just going to drop some links into the chat that I'd like you to check out before you leave. One is, of course, we appreciate your feedback. There is an evaluation form, so if you could, it's best if you just do it now. So if you can, just go to that link and offer your feedback. If you can't do it right now, just try to get to it soon if you can. And then I encourage you, of course, to go check out our vendor marketplace and the auction. And finally, we have a lot of other programming, and I think specifically related to this, Bill Braun, who Sephora mentioned, will be part of a roundtable discussion on seed sovereignty tomorrow. I think that's at 4 p.m. So I encourage you to go to the program book and learn a little bit more about that event.
He's also, I'm on the board with him of Freed Seed Federation that he started. So check out, Bill Braun's work is amazing.
Yes.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Sephora, and thank you, Jeremy, for your presentations. I am going to ask this one more question for anyone who wants to stay for just one more minute. One thing I've been thinking about is just, in the scenario of climate change and ecotypic seed, what folks who are sort of on the edges of these ecoregions, is there a suggestion for kind of how we should think about this going forward? Would it be appropriate for someone at the northern edge of an ecoregion to potentially, or just above there, to be using seed from the ecoregion just below there? Are there projections that would make that okay? Or is it just we're not at a place where we can say that people should be planting things outside of their ecoregion yet?
Great question. And certainly, again, I think everything in the native plant world, there are huge opinions that will go from either range of that conversation. But I think as a general answer, remember that the eco-regional map is a broad stroke artistic interpretation of those data set overlays, right? We are not saying that this is the strictest boundary ever. We're saying as these different ecosystems and habitats in communities, when we overlay them, these are these really good general boundaries to be working off of. So if you find yourself right on those borders, I would say, do your best for what's most locally adapted to where you are, right? Again, as climate shift, there's people who think that they should be taking from more southern or more northern ecoregions. And there's a lot of great actually plant simulators. I think the USDA has one. I forget who has it, where you can see those kind of drifting zones. And from everyone that I've spoken to, is nature's really intelligent, and we want to make sure we're preserving as much as we can these amazing arcs of diversity, because they are our great painter's palette and our greatest tools of resilience in the face of changing climate. So what we want to make sure is that we're at least safeguarding these wild genetics from each of the ecoregions, so we actually have a pool and genetic resource to be shared if it makes more sense to share now 59 with 84, or however way we go. But at some point and somewhere, we need to make sure we're safeguarding those local wild genetics to here. So I would say try to find what's most locally adapted and closest to you. If you can't find the best you can, as you saw with that study, folks were going 400 miles away to find their local, most, closest native plant. So just, this is to help kind of have that concept in your mind. And I think anyone who is daring enough to attend this workshop already kind of, I'm sure, knows a lot of these things and why they're so important. So I'd say 'tis the season to be winter sowing. All my jokes are really corny seed jokes, but I wish you all the best of luck. And if the Ecotype project or if OLC, Jeremy, when's the next OLC course start?
Oh, thank you for reminding me. February 1st. It's online, virtual, and at your own pace. So the next one's February. We'll probably do one in the spring, and then the next one will be in August.
Yeah, so stay tuned
Awesome.
with us and all the great things I know you all are doing at NOFA Mass. So yeah.
Thank you both so very much for your presentations and your time. I learned a lot, so thank you. And just very quickly give folks a chance to click there's 3 little dots to the right of where you type in a chat. And when you do that, you'll see the option to save the chat, and it will download a text file to your computer. So if you want to save anything that was in the chat, you can do that now. All right.
Thanks,
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for
Bye,
coming.
everybody.
Happy conferencing.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.